We already covered Halloween for the week, so today let's talk about some exclusive info on the new Evil Dead movie. If you guys didn't catch it, a couple weeks back I made a video all about a brand new Evil Dead movie that Bruce Campbell just started talking about during an interview, and he revealed a ton of stuff about it, which was kind of crazy. It's something we all kind of knew was happening for about a year now because both him and Sam Raimia have been dropping hints. I think Sam Raimi straight up said they were making a new movie during a Comic-Con panel or something last year, but it was still cool to hear Bruce Campbell talking about it openly because it's been a while since we had an Evil Dead movie. And we actually did learn quite a bit about it. It's going to be written and directed by a guy named Lee Cronin, who made a movie called The Hole in the Ground for A24 last year, which again, I hear is really good. He was handpicked by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell to make this movie. We also learned that instead of Ash or Brandy or Mia, it's going to have a brand new female protagonist that's kind of unrelated to everything that's happened before, but it will consider everything that's happened in the Evil Dead universe between the three movies, the requel, and Ash vs. Evil Dead canon. And the last thing we learned was that it was probably going to be called Evil Dead Now. But thanks to another interview with Bruce Campbell that dropped today on a website called Diabolique, we have some corrections there and a few new details which play into what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. You know, that exclusive stuff that only I know. So as it turns out, the actual title of the movie is not going to be Evil Dead Now. Bruce Campbell misspoke in that other interview. It's actually going to be called Evil Dead Rise, which is a little bit different and honestly slightly better than Evil Dead Now if you ask me. I think I like it a little bit more. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. He also said they have a brand new draft of the movie they just read, and they'll probably be shooting it sometime next year, which tells me it'll release either at the end of 2021 or sometime in 2022. Most likely sometime in 2022, but that's still pretty close. Finally, the biggest detail he let slip comes from a quote where he said it's a whole new ballgame. No more cabin in the woods. Okay, the reason this title change is so important is because a couple weeks back when the movie was still called Evil Dead Now, one of my sources who I trust a lot and I'm going to keep anonymous reached out to me and told me they knew this movie was happening for the better part of a year and that the script was basically done, and of course that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell handpicked Lee Cronin. All of that was confirmed by them. But what they also said is that instead of being set in a cabin in the woods, this movie is going to take place in an office building or a skyrise, as they put it. Obviously, that's something you could probably guess from the new title because it's called Evil Dead Rise, but at the time, the important thing here is that it was called Evil Dead Now. So while back then, I thought that was a little bit weird that it would be changing settings from a cabin in the woods, we've heard it from Bruce Campbell, we know the new title, so I totally believe my source. Hang on, I gotta take off my jacket. And before we get too deep into it, I wanted to ask you guys real quick to not only subscribe, but hit the notification bell and make sure that all of your notifications are on, because if they're not, when I upload something that isn't Halloween, you will not get a notification. And I make some pretty cool videos, so I think you should turn on the rest of those notifications. Okay, so I gotta be totally honest with you guys. My first reaction to this isn't 100% positive. I like the idea of changing up a franchise, especially when you're not bringing back its iconic main character, but just as iconic as Ash is the fact that most of these movies are set within a cabin in the woods. Obviously, they changed it for Army of Darkness and transported Ash back to the Dark Ages, and that was a really cool setting, but to me, hearing that it's going to take place in a skyscraper or a high-rise just kind of makes me think they want to make a cheaper movie than they've made in the past, because Evil Dead is one franchise that's gotten burned by having way too big of a budget and not making enough money back to continue it with new movies. Also, weirdly enough, we've had a lot of horror movies set within office buildings over the past few years, like The Belko Experiment, Office Uprising, and Mayhem, and I think there's even a couple more, and obviously the reason for that is because those are all low-budget movies, and that's an easy place to shoot something. And a lot of people, they're just getting sick of working the 9 to 5. Obviously, I feel like a lot of people want to go back to the office now because they're getting sick of being trapped inside their house, but at the time these movies were made, people were getting sick of going to an office every day, so it was an easy, cheap place to shoot a horror movie, which kind of is the perfect spot to shoot a horror movie. But with that being said, there are a few reasons I'm pretty confident that this is going to be a really good return to form for Evil Dead. First off, Lee Cronin is a great director. I didn't see The Hole in the Ground yet, but I have watched his short film, and he has some awesome, actually scary shot work within that, so I would highly recommend checking out his other stuff if you're kind of nervous about someone new coming in and directing. It did work out in 2013 with Fede Alvarez, but you know, not having Sam Raimi is a little bit disappointing just because you're not not having Sam Raimi directing, but he's producing and so is Bruce Campbell, so that's good. Also, based on what I've heard from my source and some other places, Lee Cronin came to them with this story idea already fleshed out, and they loved it so much that not only did they hire him to work on this Evil Dead movie, they also brought him on to shoot Sam Raimi's new show on Quibi, I think is how you say it. It's called 50 States of Fright, and I've heard that Lee Cronin's episode of that show is really good. And finally, this is Evil Dead. This is Sam Raimi. He's one of the biggest and I guess richest producers in the industry. He's a huge name. He's going to direct the new Doctor Strange movie. He's not going to make an Evil Dead movie on a Blumhouse budget. This isn't going to be a $1 million movie that they hope they return like $50 million on. They really want to get it right, and if they believe in Lee Cronin, I think I do too, and if they believe in his story, I think I do too. I'm not 100% sold, but I'm not exactly writing this movie off. That's kind of where I'm at right now. It is early in the process as well. I also think it's going to be cool for Lee Cronin to come in and play around in someone else's sandbox and be able to do whatever he wants, because in my last video I talked about this, but there is a huge mythology of Evil Dead stuff at this point. There's a bunch of movies, there's a TV show, there's a stage play, there's video games, there's comic books. You could really pull from so many different places to tell a wacky, cool, over-the-top, gory story, which is what we expect from Evil Dead. You know, Evil Dead is a very good horror franchise, but it slightly edges towards horror comedy, and I feel like bringing in a really good horror director is a good choice because horror and comedy are similar in the sense that you need to get the timing right on both for them to be effective. One big question I have about this movie is how the Necronomicon is going to end up in an office building, because that's kind of a weird spot for it to show up when it's been sitting out in the middle of the woods and then in Ash's camper for years at this point. Maybe the Necronomicon or whatever demon is speaking through it or trying to come out of it has an idea, but what I also thought of is maybe this corporation that's in this office building has been tracking down the Necronomicon, and they think they can like harness some energy or bring out a demon from hell that could help them make money, because obviously this is going to be some sort of satire on capitalism. I just played Doom Eternal, and that's what I was thinking about, how the whole reason Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal happened is because the UAC was opening a gate to hell and trying to use it as a renewable energy source. That could be a really cool idea to bounce off of for an Evil Dead movie. It would be a great way for all these deadites to pour out of a gate to hell inside an office building. Obviously, they'd have to change it quite a bit for it not to just feel like a Doom movie that's called Evil Dead Rise, but that's kind of cool, right? Maybe it's not, I don't know, let me know down in the comments. Another weird detail I noticed about Evil Dead Rise is that the only production company involved at this point is Sam Raimi's Ghost House Pictures. This doesn't have a distributor right now, which is actually a good sign because they have a script written and they're planning on shooting it next year, which shows a lot of confidence in this movie. Like, they're making it regardless of the fact they don't have someone to put it in theaters right now, which is pretty cool if you ask me. If I had to guess though, I would say Sony is probably the best bet as for who's going to put this movie out, because they did The Grudge for Sam Raimi's production company this year, and last year they put out Crawl for him, so he obviously has a good relationship. Also, he directed Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 for them. So if I had to guess, it's probably going to be Sony, but MGM and Lionsgate have hired Ghost House in the past, so I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, not having Ash is ruffling a lot of fans' feathers, but the last Evil Dead movie didn't really have him either, other than the after credits scene, and we also got 3 seasons of Ash vs. Evil Dead, so that doesn't bother me. If you're bringing in a brand new director to take this franchise into new places, I don't want him to have the baggage of other people's work. You know, he shouldn't have to adhere to all of these different rules that other people made. He should be able to pick and choose what he wants from the huge amount of established lore I already talked about. Obviously though, if Ash were to come back, I would be super excited about it. I just don't think it's going to happen because Bruce Campbell is retired, so I'm kind of just removing the possibility from the board in my head, and that's what's making me pretty excited for this movie. But that's all the new information I have for you guys today on Evil Dead. Now, let me know what you think down in the comments below, and if you're a YouTuber who's watching this and you're going to report on this exclusive info I had here today, make sure you credit me, because if the roles were reversed, I would credit you. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.